Fingers crossed. Quick run through. Right, so if the next bit works, and if Jane is ready.
Yep, all ready to go.
We'll go through one at a time. Come into my parlour.
Okay, we've got a really good range of images here tonight, and some excellent ones amongst a whole sort of category of different genres. So sometimes it's a bit difficult to actually judge one against another. I like the fact that you started off with this one. It's not a sort of thing that invites you into the camera club. So if you've got a prospective new members, I think you might be scaring them off. But in terms of how this image has been handled, it's been really cleverly put together. The authors really thought about the lines leading into the picture with this doll just on bisecting the cobweb in between, giving you a real sort of feel to, I don't know, it's almost trying to keep you out, but at the same time draw you in as well. I love the way that you've turned it into monochrome, just with that splash of red around the eyes and just little droplets of blood out the corner of her mouth. So technically and creatively, I think you've absolutely nailed it. I think in terms of composition, it's good as well. The only thing that I would have probably just improved on is that light just to the left-hand side above the doll's head is just a little bit on the bright side. And I find my eye just keeps going above the doll's head to that light, and really I should be looking more at the dull. So that one's going to be a 9.5, please.
Lines.
Okay, I have marked these earlier, so I might take a little minute just to go through and find them. Okay, I think street photography is really difficult to do because so much of it is totally out of your control. Not only the people out of your control, you've actually got to spot them and think about the background that you're putting them in. And I think the author has done superbly well on this one. The lines, the way that they intersect and the way that you've turned it into monochrome, I think works really well. The fact that they're right in the center of this sort of inverted pyramid really draws your eye into them. But at the same time, you've also, I think if you'd have just cropped it on the right hand side and got rid of the stripy or horizontal lines, I think that would have been just too much. It wouldn't have looked quite right. So I like the way that you kept the horizontal lines in as well. The fact that you've actually just clicked the shutter at that point where they're just crossing that intersection, I think has worked just spot on. I think in terms of capturing the moment, you were well in there. You just got it absolutely spot on and you nailed it. And a good conversion to black and white as well. I think if you'd had colour, then possibly their clothes would have actually drawn you out. In terms of the way that you've presented it, it just makes you look at the shapes and the people. It just draws you in. So that one's going to be a 10.
Sorry, 10.
10. Top of the shop.
Chicago summer.
Yeah, this is really unusual. And it's something that I think has been well created and well captured within camera. The fact that you've got all this slow movement of the water as it's actually rushing down, you can imagine somebody actually out in the rain. But beyond that, you've also got some other people or something standing there, but you've darkened that down. So our main point or our focal point of the image is this person literally just standing in the rain and just all the water coming off them. So I think it's a really intriguing image and a really different image as well. I love the fact that you've got the muted colours. The red just draws your eye in, but not to a stage where you can't explore the rest of the picture. I think it complements the rest of the picture. And that strong diagonal from the bottom left-hand side leading into the darkness on the right, I think works really well. And that's going to be another 10, please.
Butterfly on blackberry blossom.
Yeah, let me just find this. That's trouble. Normally when I judge, I just go straight off and don't worry about coming backwards and forwards. Oh, come on. So forgive me. And I can never find it when I need it. That's why I much rather prefer just to give the images a mark straight off. Ah, right, found it. Okay, right. I love the natural history aspect of this one. I think the way that you've actually gone in close and you photographed it and you've kept all of the detail actually in the butterfly, I think has worked really well. The antennae, both of them are absolutely pin sharp, and that's not easy to do because you're so close to it, your depth of field is very shallow. So well done, you managed to capture that. Also, the fact that you've got a very light butterfly against a dark background, it would have been easy to either sort of burn out the butterfly or lose detail in the background. But in this case, you've actually captured both. So I think in terms of a natural history shot, it's spot on. You've really captured the moment, technical, the composition works really well. The one thing I don't like is the key line. I think it does need a key line around it, but the fact that you've brought the key line in from the edge and it intersects over the top of your picture, I think actually detracts from it, which is a real shame. And also the colour, I think it's good that you've chosen a colour that's not bright white, because again, it detracts. You've chosen a colour that fits in the tones of the butterfly. So I think that is just almost there, but it's such a shame that key line's brought in, because to me, it's just taken away from the actual focal point of the image, which is the butterfly in the centre. But well done for the background. The background, I think, is superb on it. That's going to be a 9, please.
Floral shadow.
Yeah, I think this is really different. I like the intersection of the way the flower and the vase and the light all interplay with one another. And because it's something that's done at home, everything is under your control. You've had control over where you put the vase, how you actually play with the light, the way that you've put the seed head actually in the dark area, so that it actually shows up well against the background. But at the same time, you've still got separation between the vase and the actual seed head as well in the bright part of the picture. When you view this actually on the screen, at the moment, the way that it's showing, there's actually a band on the right-hand side. I think you could have done 2 things. One, if you were going to include it in, put a key line around the outside so that you know that is part of the picture. Or 2, as it is, I would have just cropped that right-hand side off, because actually looking at it without the key line, I think it works better without that actual black border down the side. So for this one, I've given 9.5.
Fly tipping.
Yeah, this has given me a whole new sort of perspective on flies. A number of times during lockdown, I think I've sat out in the garden and I've been amazed by the colour of these flies that I've never really noticed before. But I think that's something that we all do, isn't it? As part of lockdown, we've had sort of experiences and times that we'd never sort of thought about looking at certain things in a different way. And this one is absolutely a spot on capture. The detail of this fly from start to finish is actually incredible. You've got detail right from the proboscis at the front all the way through almost to the wingtips at the back, and the way that you've actually got the posture of the fly just almost down to, if you like, fly level, I think works really well. So you've got detail beautifully all the way through where you want it. You've got another beautiful background as well. And I think the yellow actually works well with sort of the greeny blue of the fly and all of its abdomen and its thorax. Those eyes are absolutely amazing, aren't they? I mean, normally you'd think of a fly and you think, yuck. But looking at that, it's almost actually beautiful. So it just shows how wonderful nature is. So that one's going to be another 10.
Curia Botanical Garden.
Yeah, it's really difficult. When you're taking pictures of flowers, they're not easy at the best of the time. You'd think it'd be quite simple because they're just sat there the whole time. You don't do very much. You can just go up and take your time to get a picture of them. I think the problem with this one is the fact that you've just gone in, you've looked down, you've seen the flower, you've taken the picture. And a lot of it is actually out of focus. You've got the main sort of central part in focus, but the rest of it falls off quite quickly. Also, the background, even if you just move around slightly, on the right-hand side, there's a very bright background of another flower there, which is never easy. I know when you're trying to take pictures of flowers, there's normally more than one. So trying to isolate just that one image that you're trying to capture from the background and everything else is really paramount. And sometimes just moving around slightly, just maybe lowering your angle or moving slightly to the right, will just get rid of that one that's distraction out of the background. Again, you've got a bud on the left-hand side as well. And again, I'm moving between each of them. I just don't feel there's quite enough detail in there, which is a shame. But as I said, they're not easy to take. So keep plugging away and having a go. But this one's going to be a 5.
Kingfisher with fish.
Yeah, kingfishers are incredibly difficult to take, and I know there's been a glut of them left, right and centre, but still actually capturing that moment is still incredibly difficult. I know when I took a picture of one over at Raynham, I think it was a 7 frames per second. The first frame, it was perfect. The second frame, it was halfway out the picture, and forget about the other 5 frames, it had already gone. So just capturing that moment with the wings up, the water coming off, and the fish actually in its beak, I think you've done incredibly well. I love the way that you've cropped it into a square frame. I think it just works really well with the shape of the bird at that time. And with all the water droplets and everything coming off, I can almost count every single feather detail in there, and a very, very complementary background as well. So that's going to be another 10, I'm afraid. They're all too good.
Box Hill.
Yeah, I think landscapes are really, really difficult. Let me just find this one. I need a bigger screen. Okay. Yeah, I think landscape is one of the most difficult sort of aspects of photography, because again, like street photography, so much of it is out of your control, in terms of the weather, in terms of what's happening out there with the clouds, the light. You don't control it. You can to a certain extent with filters, but at the same time, so much of it depends on you being in the right place and the right time, and also capturing the landscape before you. I think you've done everything that you can with this view. You've raised the horizon way up into the frame. You've made it letterbox. So you give a feeling of depth. And that's one of the hardest things when you're taking a two-dimensional image, is converting it into something that actually feels like 3D, like when you were there. So the fact that you've got a high viewpoint also helps. You've got the sweeping depth in there to the far distance and the horizon, and you've got the horizon straight, which is good as well. So good exposure throughout. I think the only thing that you're let down by is really the light and the weather at the time. I think landscapes now have got to be so much more than just taking a picture of where you are. So this one's going to be 5.5, please.
Morning at the Salmon Leap.
Yeah, and we got very different view here compared to what we have with the other one. We've got all the moodiness and lighting that we've got from an early morning. The beautiful reflections, the fact that you've got a still morning, you've got the beautiful reflections actually in the water, and the wispy clouds actually also moving across the screen almost. It gives you a feeling of dynamic feel to the landscape. The fact that it's actually moving, that it is actually alive. I think also I like the way that you've included the borders around there of the trees and the bushes, just giving a frame to the picture itself. I think it just gives it another little bit of depth. I do feel that it's slightly on the slant. It might be the fact that you might have hills going up on the right hand side, if there's such a thing as a hill in Essex, but it looks like it's slanting up on the right hand side, and perhaps the mist is just holding or just hiding the horizon. But I love the feel that you've got for this image. So that one's going to be a 9.5, just simply because of the horizon.
Accurate to within a few hours or so.
Yeah, I did something very similar actually with a dandelion. I was sat out in the garden, there's all these dandelions, and I thought, oh, I've got to do something with that. And went out and got them. I did mine in monochrome, so something very similar, but also very different. And the hardest thing about a dandelion is actually getting the detail all the way through from front to back. And I think you've done that really well. You've actually captured that moment of just the gap in the dandelion. You've got detail all the way through from front to back. And I like the way that you've tilted it at an angle almost to give a diagonal feel as it's coming in from the left-hand side. I think the little dandelion seed sort of coming off, I think it's just a little bit on the large size. But I do like the way that you've done your background. I think that works well. And it's definitely fun to do. I think just the fact that it's just out of scale, if you like, with the actual dandelion itself. I think I'm going to go 8.5 on that one, please.
Dragonfly.
Yeah, and I didn't see so many dragonflies around this year. Let me find out where we are. Normally I see quite a few sort of whizzing around the garden all over the place, but this year I've hardly seen any at all, or even the demoiselle flies. But you've been really lucky with this one, because normally they perch on the most awful branch or twig, or with an awful background, and goodness knows what else. But this one, I think it's actually perched itself on a lovely piece of log, and the log and the colours within that, or the wood within that, actually complement the dragonfly itself. I think you've done well with the detail of these, because they've got a really long or wide wingspan. It's difficult sometimes to get them all in focus. You've definitely got the front end of the wing in focus, and it more or less stops just at the body of the dragonfly itself, and the back wings are out of focus. Oh, and that has to be my phone going. So I think you've done as well as you can with this. So that one's going to be an 8.5. Right, it will go to answer phone, then it will just bleep for the rest of the time.
Cinnabar caterpillar.
Yeah, again, there's been quite a few caterpillars around. I've seen lots and lots of pictures of caterpillars this year. And I think this one works really well. I love the way that you've actually captured it, just crawling halfway up this branch. You've really captured sort of a sense of movement as it's actually moving its way up from one leaf to the next. And they're just incredible animals, aren't they? Or, well, insects, I suppose, of some kind. I love the fact that you've got all of the details, all of the sort of the hairs, even down to the finest detail. And you've got a very sort of complementary background as well. I think one of the difficulties that we have, particularly with digital, is the fact that the greens can be sort of overly bright. And I think that's something that we need to look at. And when we're actually producing an image like this, is maybe just tone the greens down slightly, because the way it is at the moment, it's slightly overpowering just on the upper part of the stem. And you can do that within nature photography, even if it's really strict rules, you can still tone that down a bit. So that one's going to be a 9.5, please.
Grazing kelpies.
Yeah, these kelpies, I've wanted to go up and see these for ages, and I think it's the Falkirk Wheel, which is the thing where the narrowboats come down as well. I think they're all within sort of about a mile of each other, but they look amazing structures, and I've seen so many different pictures of them, mainly from the angle where you actually see the whole of the horse's head. So it's really good to actually see these in a totally different angle. And it's nice to see the author actually think about how they can present it in a different way. Some people might think that the fact that there's no separation between the two, the ears just crossing over one to the other, is a bit of a problem. To me, I don't worry about that. I think it actually just joins these two amazing sculptures together. And you can almost get a feeling that they are actually just grazing on the grass. I think that you've cropped it down well. You've really sort of given them a little bit of room to move within there, but you've cropped it down just to the right level that your focal point, you know straight away, are these two horses. So that one's going to be an 8.5, please.
Glassy lady.
And okay, now I know with lockdown we've all been doing a lot of still life and making most of what we've got around the house, and I think that you've got a real sort of mixture of things with this head. You've really gone over the top, what with the cloth, the head, the sort of diamante on the top as well, and the colors. I think it makes for a very sort of confusing image as such, and judges as we are, we like to keep things simple if we can. In terms of a technical side, I think you got it spot on. I love the way that you've got the background. I think it complements what you've done with the head and the cloth. And I think in terms of the standard of photography, if you're photographing glass of any kind, it's very easy to get highlights. But in this case, you've managed to control all of that really well. In terms of a storyline, though, I'm not sure it does anything for me. Yeah, it's sort of creative, but to me, I need to know a little bit more about it. And whether you can sort of explain that more in the title, I don't know. But that one's going to be a 6, please.
Dusk.
Let's find that one. It's always the last one you're thinking of. Okay. Yeah, dusk it's really difficult to take images because you've got that contrast of very bright light and very dark areas. Um, and I can understand why you take it, because the colours at dusk, particularly after the sun has just gone below the horizon, are normally pretty stunning. And I think that's what you've relied on. You've relied on sort of the colours and almost the silhouette of the palm tree and everything else that's going on there. I feel that composition could have been improved by cropping down this lamppost or the post of whatever it is. I think that makes a natural break within the image. And I don't think there's anything on the right hand side that actually adds to it. So I would have actually just cropped that off and kept on the left hand side of that. Also, I think you either include detail in the foreground or you don't. There is just enough detail there to see a little bit of what's going on, but because this is just half of the image, I want to see a little bit more in there as well. So I can appreciate why you've taken it. You've been drawn by the colours, but I think you could have even gone to the other extreme of maybe just making it into a really strong silhouette and just even cropping out the base of it to just give that diagonal going up through the picture. So I'm afraid it doesn't quite work for me, this one. So that's going to be a 5, please.
Hannah, after a light shower.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, this one, because I said about the earlier one. Let's find it. Where we had the key line that intersected the butterfly, and I didn't like that. Well, you know what judges are like. This one key line intersects, but this time we've actually got the leaf coming out over the top. So it's actually made it almost into a 3D image. So in that case, I think it actually works. It almost as if it's like a window frame and the flower is poking its way through. So you've created that 3D image. Again, I also like the fact that the way that you've arranged that flower within your frame. It's so incredibly difficult with flower photography to actually decide which bits you want to include, and very often you just tend to include the whole lot, and it doesn't always work. In this case, you've thought about where you're going to crop it and how you make that leaf actually come out of the frame, and the way the other petals are just unfolding there, I think works really well. And even the drop of water as well. You can't beat the old squidgy water bottle. Again, the background also complements the flower as well. And that tinge of yellow around the outside of the petals really sort of hits off with the red. So that one's going to be a 9, please.
Bath time.
Okay, yeah, this one I think everybody's going to be happy. They're going to see the baby and go, oh, isn't that cute? And I think you really have captured that moment, that sort of look of innocence and sort of wonderment at being in the bath and all the water and everything else, and all these strange adults looking over the top, oohing and ahhing at you. And I think you've really captured that feeling of this baby. I think where it's really sort of fallen down is on the processing. The eyes are just incredibly blue, and it might be that the baby's eyes are actually that blue, but it just seemed a little bit oversaturated. Also, when you're taking a portrait like this, it's important to have both eyes sharp. At the moment, the eye on the left-hand side is pin sharp, but you're losing depth of field on the right-hand side, and that eye is actually really soft. Also, when you process it, be a bit more sympathetic with your processing. I feel because you might have oversaturated the eyes, it's also brought out the skin tones around the cheeks, and the ear is really bright as well, and almost to the point where baby's almost got lipstick on, which is a real shame. I think if you're treating babies in terms of processing, I think you really want to keep it soft and gentle. And I think this has just been processed a little bit on the harsh side, which is a real shame. As I say, I think you've really captured that moment. So that one is going to be a 6, please.
Climbing up again.
Yeah, I looked at this one for quite a time, and I like the creativity and the idea of what you've done. I like the way that you've actually fitted the shape of the cobweb and the spider to the shape below, but I don't totally understand why you've got it as an umbrella. And it's one of these, yes, it's creative, and yes, it sort of works, but I don't know, I don't quite get it as such. I don't understand why you've got it within that shape of the umbrella. Keep going to sort of the umbrella is the main part of the image, and the spider, I don't know, I can't see the two fitting together. I do like the way that you've included the key line in, but if you're going to include it in, watch it doesn't intersect over the left-hand side of your umbrella. You could have just moved it back a fraction, but I assume that you've gone for like a square format, and it's not quite square, it's just chopped the edge of that. So in terms of creativity and technical ability, I can't really fault it. I just don't quite get it as a judge, I'm afraid. So that's going to be an 8, please.
Royal Academy, here we come.
Yeah, somebody else has been in lockdown, and I'd love to be able to paint. I'm a rubbish painter, that's why I took up photography. But I love the fact that this person has taken the time to plan and lay out everything. The way the brush is arranged in the corner, with the booklet and the water, and every detail about this has been thought out. And there's no real sort of bright areas. It's just a nice, subtle, gentle light across the whole lot. And it's something you could almost, I think you could sell to the paint manufacturer's catalogue here, and they're more than happy to have it actually in their brochure. I think it's a fantastically competent piece of work. And I've really sort of enjoyed looking at this in a very different way to a lot of the other images. Sometimes images just sort of hit you between the eyes and you've got to see them. This one is more of a gentle, more of, I'm enjoying it. I'm exploring my way around the image. I'm exploring the painting and the different elements of it as well. So I think that's been really well put together, and that's going to be a 10, please.
PPE.
Yeah, it's funny because a year ago, if we'd have talked about PPE, nobody would have known what the hell you were talking about. And yet now it just rolls off our tongue, doesn't it? It's a sad fact of life where we are at the moment, in that we understand all of these terms and what's going on. And in terms of street photography, I think you've just captured this moment, haven't you? I think there's been lots of cases with people wearing masks and not actually wearing them in appropriate ways. And I just love the way it gave me a real chuckle seeing this guy walking down with this mask on his head. And I think that's been captured really well. I love the way that you've turned it into monochrome. Again, it makes your eye go straight to this guy. And then you sort of peruse your way down the street as well. So in terms of composition, I think it just falls down slightly in the fact that the guy's sort of heading out the picture and we're leaning over to the left. Which is a real shame. And I know street photography is very difficult, and the amount of time that you have to actually spot this guy and take the picture, I think you've done really well. So technically, I love the way you've turned it into monochrome. I love the detail all the way through. You've kept detail in the whites, but you've still got detail in his dark suit as well. So that one's going to be an 8.5, please.
Dubrovnik.
Yeah, it's not a place I've been to, Dubrovnik, but it's definitely a place that I would love to go to at some point if we ever get a chance. So I think this is one of these where it's taken from an unusual viewpoint. It looks as if we've just had rain and we've got detail actually in all of the textures and the colours of the roofs. I think actually are muted and work really well together. I love the way that you've actually taken the moment where everybody's actually separated out, and there's nobody sort of crossing. You haven't got these big groups of people, except maybe right at the very top. But on top of that as well, you've also done a different treatment to it. It's given quite sort of a moody, muted, almost artistic feel to it. And I think that works really well. So that one's going to be a 10.
Coffee time.
Yeah, this is another one I think probably done during lockdown, where it's in a studio, everything is under your control. And you'd think, well, everything's under your control. It's actually quite easy. Well, it can also be quite intimidating when you're starting from a blank canvas and you're having to set everything up to yourself. You have to think about every single little detail. And I think the author of this one has actually done that. Not only have they thought about the way that they're going to photograph it, the fact that you've got a black background with dark coffee beans and a white cup is incredibly difficult to do, but they've controlled the light all the way through, even to the point where you get this really good reflection of the interesting cup. And on top of that, you've then got a red spoon, just drawing your eye up to the top, and this little flow of coffee beans all the way down into the cup. So again, something I think would work really well with any sort of advertisement. So yeah, the red key line I think works well. If you hadn't had the key line, it wouldn't have been able to place everything or the elements within the frame. That red key line just keeps everything in, and it's not a bright red, it's not a thick red line, it's just a nice thin key line that just complements and makes the image stand out. So again, that's a 10, please.
Snowmobiles.
Yeah, one of the difficulties when you're taking pictures in snow is the fact that it really throws out your colour balance. And I think that's what's happened in the case of this. Rather than being white snow, it's given that really sort of blue tinge to it, which is a shame. It just makes it feel sort of outworldly. The fact that you've got the red and the black, I think you've done well to actually make a composition of this where it works. So even though you've got 3 on the top and 3 on the bottom, it's almost a bit like the red arrows sort of shooting off into the sky. And the fact that you've got no detail in the snow at all makes these feel as if they're almost floating or flying through the air rather than actually just being on the snow. The red and the black really draws your eye in, but is it enough interest for the whole sort of excitement level of our competition tonight? I think we've got more interesting ones there, but I think you've done well to spot it and make a photograph out of it. So that one's going to be 5.5, please.
Head for heights.
Yeah, I think this is the old viaduct out at, oh, I can't remember where now, where they've got the steam train. I can't think of the name of it, but my cousin used to, say again?
Chapel
Yeah.
Waistcoat.
That's it, that's the one. My cousin used to work on the railway there, the steam train there, and I remember actually going out on the train over the top of this thing. But yeah, it's an amazing place to actually photograph, and well done for having a go and trying something different. It's a real sort of, I don't know, one of these things to try and get used to actually joining images together. But to do it competently, it takes a little bit of time and practice. And I think you've sort of almost got it. Just the light on the girl and the boy at the top, it doesn't quite fit in with the light that you got at the bottom. And also probably using a different image would have helped rather than just flipping the two around, using the same image and then flipping it and putting her up the top. It doesn't quite make it believable enough, which is a shame. I like the way that you've kept everything vertical, though. You've got all of the detail in the bricks all the way through, and the way that the arches recess off into the distance. So it's a good attempt to try something different, but I'm not sure it's quite come off this time. So that one's going to be 6.5, please.
Bernadette.
Yeah, any sort of stage photography or anything under sort of show lights, which is what this sort of almost looks like it's done. I feel as if she's about to burst into song at any moment. But I feel there's a couple of things with the portraiture side that you could possibly improve. Firstly, detail all the way through with her hair. There's parts of it, the lighting is pretty good on the hair. I'd say you're sort of about 9 out of 10 for lighting on the hair. You've got detail through most of it, but there's just a couple of patches where it's just going to pure black. And I can understand it's incredibly difficult with the light. Also a shoulder on the left-hand side. I feel that actually you could have probably just chopped a shoulder off at where the strap of a dress is. I feel at the moment, because it's a light area on the edge of the frame, it's just pulling my eye to the left-hand side. and it's as if you almost sort of did include it in, but not quite. It was sort of, I'll have a go, but you didn't actually decide yet, definitely that's it. It's more sort of a happy accident rather than the feel of the photographer, this is what I feel I want to do. Either include the whole shoulder in or don't, get rid of a bit of it. And the other thing as well is the height within the frame. Her eye, because you've got a big gap at the top where a hat finishes and the top of the frame itself, it means her eyes are just above the horizon level. So if you think of the central point, her eyes are literally just above that. If you'd have just trimmed off the top, that would have moved her up further within the frame. It would have made her more important within the frame as well. And it would have made it a much stronger portrait. I do like the way that you captured their skin tones though. It's very easy to lose detail on the shoulders or on the top of the cheeks or even on the forehead, but you've held all of that in, and particularly the sparkly bit on the hat as well. So it's one of these, it's almost there, but not quite. That one's going to be an 8.5, please.
Little owl.
That's fine. Yeah, I love this image. I love the feeling of this image. The fact that you've sort of captured that moment with this little owl almost looking at you, very startled. You've given it a good firm base to stand on. You've got detail all the way through the base, and coming up to the owl itself, you've got beautiful details in all of the feathers, and the eyes, you've almost got that sort of that glassy feel to the eyes, that it's alive, it's there, it's startled, and it's looking at you. I think the background has been incredibly well handled. The feeling of grass there in the background, but at the same time, it is muted and just out of focus. There is a little bit of a bright area to the top left-hand side, which again, I probably would have toned down a little bit. But yeah, I think that's a cracking portrait of a little owl, and that's going to be a 10 as well, please.
Jessica.
Yeah, Jessica, again, portraiture is really difficult. Everybody thinks whenever you're doing portraiture in the studio, it's easy. You just turn up, all the lights are set up, the model sits there, you take these pictures, they all become winners, and you get loads of 10s. And it's not that easy. I mean, I've probably been doing portraiture now for about 6 years, and it was never my sort of first choice. And I've learned over the time how incredibly difficult it actually is. I think with this one, again, you've captured a good feeling of Jessica. I like the way that you've got her at an angle, and you've got detail in her hair, her eyes are sharp. But one of the difficulties of the angle that you've taken is the fact that you are down low. You're almost looking up her nose. And that's not a very sort of flattering way to portray any model. And I think that's one of the downsides of this image. Same sort of thing that I just said on the other one. Also think about where you're placing your person within the frame. Again, this one's got loads of room at the top, and the eyes again in the center of the image. Just get rid of that bit off the top. You don't need it. It will push the eyes up in the frame. Again, it will improve the strength of the lady within the picture. There's a few little sort of light areas, just particularly on the chin and on the nose as well, which if you look at a technique called frequency separation, that's something that you can use to actually get rid of those sort of highlights. And there's loads of YouTube videos and things out there that you can look at that you can just work your way through, and that will help improve just some of the tone of her skin. So that one's going to be a 7, please.
How's that?
Yeah, I love a bit of sports photography. Let's find out where he is. Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to do because you need a long lens to actually get the detail in there. And then doing that, it compresses the background. So anybody that's in the background, it then brings them close to the sportsman or sportswoman actually in the field of play. I think that's one of those things that you put up with. You're going to have sports events, you're going to have spectators in there. So to me, that doesn't worry too much. In fact, the guy in the blue shirt behind the cricketer's head actually makes his helmet and everything else stand out. And I'm a bit afraid that the bails flying off are going to hit that guy in the straw hat just in the corner. But I think that you've captured that moment superbly well. not only have you got the guy taking full strike at the ball, but the fact that the ball's whizzing through, hit the wickets, and the fact that you captured those 2 bows flying, I think you've done incredibly well. You've got detail all the way through. Even though he's got the white gloves, there's detail in those as well, and the dark pads make it a bit of a nightmare. I would suggest that to get rid of some of the background detail, maybe just tone it down a little bit. You could easily do that and just make the cricketer stand out a little bit more from his background. But that one's going to be a 9, please.
Light trail.
Yeah, another one where I think lockdown, lots of time going out in the garden, trying these things with light trails and trying different things with lights, I think has worked really well. I think the thing is with this, you need a little bit more of a story to it. I find the light patterns interesting. I find the shapes and the colours within it, I find it interesting. But I feel as if I want a bit more of a focal point in there. I feel as if it's one of these that would work well with another subject as part of a background. I know many years ago, I took loads and loads of pictures of smoke in the garage where you're just with a joss stick taking pictures of it. And they sat there on my hard drive for years and years and years. And I thought they were wonderful, but I didn't have the foggiest what I was going to use them for. And then I had a picture of a dancer with a gap at the side, and somebody said to me, "Oh, that would look good with something in it." And I thought, smoke. And I actually went and raked all my images out and started putting them together. And I think that's what this is. I think this would work really cool with the subject that actually complements it. But I think on its own, I just feel as if something is missing. I think in terms of technical ability, I think you've nailed it. You've got it spot on. But I just feel there's something missing with it. So that's going to be a 7, please.
Okay, and we're just over halfway through, so I think we might take a break there, if that's all right with everybody. Thank you, Jane. Well done. The timing on that was brilliant.
I do my best.
Are we there?
We are.
Can you all see honey fungus? Don't.
We can.
Yeah, there we go. That is honey fungus then, this one.
Okay, natural history shot. It's helped on this one in the fact that I love the shape of the wood and the tree that it's actually growing out of. I think technically you've actually nailed it. You've got detail all the way through. And I love the work that you've done with the textures in the tree trunk itself, as well as the fungus. It would have been quite easy to just blow out the detail in this one, particularly with sort of the dark background within the tree itself and the very white sort of texture of the fungus. But you've got this one spot on. But it's one of these things, it's very difficult to make sort of honey fungus look sexy. So I think that's a good study. And that's going to be, oh, what did I give that one? An 8, please.
This is where it's all just gone suddenly very wrong. So off to work.
Yep, the one place that I did actually manage to get to this year in January, I was out in India. And it always amazes me where they've got these bikes and the way that they cycle through. I was actually doing tigers in Bandahar, and there'll be sort of, you'll think about tigers and there being apex predators, and there'll be all the rangers riding around on these bikes looking exactly like that, and just with a stick that's about 2 foot long as their protection. That's it. So I can appreciate these, the fact that it's winter time, they're all wrapped up, they've got their jumpers on. It's pretty much like our summertime, I think, their winter time. But you captured that moment spot on. You've got all of the detail in their bikes, and I like the way that you push them up the frame so that you've got the long shadows coming through as well. So incredibly difficult, I think, probably trying to get a shutter speed, but at the same time, keep your ISO down as well. Even the detail in the shops in the distance where you've got the dark areas, I think you've managed to capture that one as well. So that one is going to be a 9, please.
Jane, that's Lobster Man.
Yeah, and let me find him. I'd like to know more about Jane Nudd, Lobsterman. I feel that the fact that you've put him in this really sort of tight key line, you're almost sort of locking him in. And it's a shame because they're sort of, he's all kitted out with his wellies and his yellow apron and his gloves. He sort of looks quite a character. I feel as if there's sort of more that we could feel from or understand from the picture of Mr. Nudd's. And I think you haven't quite captured it on this case. If you're going to include the whole of the gentleman, I think it would have been good to actually have him within his work environment so we could see detail of maybe his catch and things going on behind him. So he needs a little bit more room to breathe. On the other hand, if you want to know more about him and just go in and just do it as a portrait, I think you want to be closer in. You don't need to include all of him. So I think this sort of falls between two areas. In terms of exposure, I mean, you've got exposure spot on with him, you've got detail all the way throughout, you've darkened down the background so it really makes him stand out. I just feel that you haven't quite got the sort of whole story of this guy, which is a real shame because he looks quite a character. So that one is going to be a 5.5, please.
Mirror image.
Okay, so this one, somebody else has been locked down thinking about what they can use around them and come up with this creation. And it's very intriguing. I like the shapes and the angles and the way that you've actually worked it so that you've got a sort of a side view and a top view as well. And I think the colours are very complementary. There's a lot going on in this picture. You've got you've got your background, you've got your central element, you've got the actual hummingbird with its beak going in, you've got a flower, you've then got the web shape on top of that as well. And I think that in terms of photography, technically, I think you've captured it spot on. But I think in terms of composition, you've given me too much. There's too much to look at. And my eye is sort of flitting around the frame, not knowing where to actually settle. So I think technically and creatively, you're spot on. I think composition just needs a little bit of work. That one's going to be a 9 though, because technically it's spot on.
Overlooking the city.
Oh, can't find it. And I've highlighted all the ones that I haven't done, so you'd think I'd find it easier. Come on. Ah, found it. Right, okay. Yeah, I think this is difficult. I can understand what the author has tried to capture, and the fact that you're out looking and looking through the window and trying to capture the view that these people are looking at as well. It's almost like a fly in the wall documentary look. I think one of the difficulties when you're taking pictures through these windows is the fact that often they're sort of maybe polarized, and if you've got a polarizer or something on as well, it gives you this really sort of weird look. And I think that's one of the difficulties. If I want to see part of the view, and that's what the image has given me, a lot of the area of the view, it's not really clear. It's all very muddy and all very sort of confusing. I think also the characters as well within it, I can appreciate trying to decide where to stop, which person to include in and which people to sort of crop out. I think to me, the 3 main central bits, the lady on the left-hand side sort of looking down, the guy in the red t-shirt and the one with the phone, I think they're your 3 characters. And I think you could have cropped in to actually disregard the people either side that are also chopped in half anyway. So I think this is one of these where it's difficult to convey the whole story. I think you've given yourself a real struggle to convey everything that's going on. And again, it hasn't quite worked. I think if your characters are going to be part of the story, I think you need to be tighter with your cropping and maybe a little bit more light in there so we can see the characters. Or if the story is what they're looking at beyond, then you could just make the characters into the outline, but then I want to see what's going on beyond that into the distance. So I think it's one of these images that's made up of too many things at the moment. And when you as a photographer, you're in control of the image, I think you need to decide at the point of taking the picture what you're going to focus on. What is your focal point? What is the thing that you want the viewer to look at? And to me at the moment, it's not exactly clear. So that's going to be a 5, please.
Fueled for flight.
Yeah, titles are really important. And when you give something a title, straight away your viewer actually goes to that thing and looks at it. And in this case, fueled for flight, you're looking at the insect that's taking off. So for me, if that's the case, that has got to be pin sharp. I think you've done brilliantly well in capturing it in mid-flight, because these things buzz around like crazy. But I think if you're going to make that the focal point of your title, it's got to be pin sharp and spot on. And as it is, it doesn't quite fit it. It's a shame, because the flower itself, you've got a good depth of field throughout. You've got good detail in all of the whites. And that is one of the hardest things. So I'm going to sort of take the title with a bit of pinch of salt, really. The background, again, similar to one of the earlier flowers that we looked at, think about the direction that your camera shooting, and when you're actually looking through the frame, look all the way around the actual edge of the frame and see what you're including in the picture. I think you've done a little bit of work on the background to try and sort of dull down that bright sort of brown stalk or branch. And that's worked to a certain extent, but then you've got the bud on the left-hand side as well, that again, my eyes looking backwards and forwards to. So there's sort of a couple of elements there that's dragging my view away from the main focal point of the picture. So that one is going to be a 7.5, please.
Millennium.
Yeah, again, this one, the main thing that draws your eye in straight away is the colour. Reds are the thing that attracts us first of all, are always the thing that we're going to go in and look at, and it will draw our eye to it. I think you've done well to crop the top down and just constrain our view within this window. Do we need all of the detail on the right hand side? I'm not sure whether or not we do. I think the fact that, yes, you put it off to an angle, yes, it does give it some sort of balance. So I can see why you've included it in. And on top of that, you've got a hoverfly in there. I think that is absolutely pin sharp as well. So often when we're looking at plants and flowers, it's very easy to just look down and take it from our angle, from our height. Sometimes I think the stronger image, if you get down lower and actually sort of looking up and making it strong within the frame. So I can appreciate the fact that technically I think your depth of field is good all the way through. Again, the greens really sort of pull your eye as well, so you could possibly just tone those down a little bit, and a vignette around the outside just to tone down the light part to make it a little bit darker, make the flower the main focal point. So that one's going to be a 7, please.
Growing up fast.
Yeah, and I like the aspect and the way that you've caught all these 3 lamb chops all sort of staring at you and one off into the distance. I think you've got enough room where you could have actually just tipped your camera up a fraction, because I'm not sure we need all of the hay and the bales at the front. I think there's a lot of foreground there that we don't actually need, and the sheep at the back is just a bit squashed in. I do like the way that you've composed it, in the fact that we've sort of got the 3 together, giving you that triangular feel as you move around the frame. And again, the white sort of coat of the sheep would have been fairly easy to actually burn out, but you got detail all the way through. I just love the expression that they're actually looking at you. So a well seen picture. That one's going to be an 8, please.
The yellow boat.
Yeah, sunsets and sunrises, you get this beautiful, beautiful cast of colours. Particularly if you're by the sea. I'm lucky enough that I do live by the sea, and very often I'm down at Old Lee taking pictures. And it's particularly helpful when you get this lovely sort of stillness, either in the morning or in the evening, where the water is just literally like a mill pond, and the beautiful detail that you get of these little ripples coming through, picking up all the colours of the sky. I think it works really well with this boat. And one of the problems when you get a number of boats all moored together is actually picking out which bits you include and which bits you don't. And I think they're a bit later this year because of COVID. They didn't all put their boats back in. So there was a lot of mooring buoys, but not many boats necessarily. So I think you've done well with this one. I would have even probably cut it down a little bit further and made it even more into a letterbox, because the top of the sky isn't really doing too much up there. I think once it starts to lose its colour, you could have probably got a bit off the top and maybe just a little bit off the bottom as well, to really sort of focus your attention on these three boats. So that one's going to be a 7.5, please.
R&R.
Yeah, as I said before, street photography is incredibly difficult because so much is out of your control. And I like the way that you found this character, and I think he's onto you. I think he's noticed you taking a picture, because he's giving you sort of that squinty look through his glasses, if to say what's going on here. And one of the difficulties when they're wearing glasses is actually getting contact with their eyes. I think in this case, the frame is just sort of going across the eye, which is a real shame. So you lose that sort of contact with the person themselves. I think also when you've cropped down the picture, you've just taken a bit off the top of his head where his hair's sort of flapping up, and also his feet as well. And I don't mind that so much, but I think you've either got to do it in a way that it makes it look as if you meant it to happen, rather than it was an accident, which is a real shame, because I think he's a brilliant character. I do like the way that you converted it to black and white to get rid of any of the distracting colours. I think that works well, and the fact that he's got his cigarette hanging half out of his mouth and his coffee cup on there as well, he's evidently having a good time. So a good title. What did I give this one? That one's a 7.5, please.
Frozen Geum.
Yeah, I've often thought about putting flowers into ice in the freezer, but I've never had enough room in the freezer, and particularly with lockdown, you tended to stock up your freezer, so I even didn't have time then. But I like the idea of it, and I like the way that you photographed it, particularly with the colours and the textures of the ice. Just the little patch of leaf on the left-hand side, just sort of showing through the ice, and you've got a strong diagonal. Again, I think I would have probably gone in even closer with it, because I love the detail when you look closely at it in the flower itself, and the way the ice is actually muted and I don't know, just soften the details within it. I think it's really intriguing. So I think you've probably included possibly a little bit too much around the outside. I would have gone more for sort of a landscape format rather than the square, and really made that diagonal a strong diagonal through the frame. But yeah, I think it's a great idea to try. That one was, oh come on, a 7.5, please.
Young herons by the Great Ooze.
Yeah, somebody said about them being sort of prehistoric looking birds, and they really are as well. And I think this is a good capture of the two together. When you've got two together, it's really difficult to get them both in focus. Which one do you focus on? Which one do you make dominant? But I think in this case, the author's done well in actually getting them both with a good depth of field, so they're both sharp. But at the same time, the background isn't too sharp. It's just nice and subtle. This one in the front with his eye, just really sort of yellow eye, just looking out. The feather detail on there and everything is absolutely technically spot on as well. So I think that one works really well. That one's a 9.
Spoon Star.
Yeah, what do you do when you're in lockdown and you've got some silver spoons? You take photographs of them. And yeah, I think it's one of these, we've all tried different things, haven't we, during our time, where we can find something, range it and try and see if we can make a photograph out of it. And I think it's a competent example of some lockdown studio work, particularly with silver spoons, because you get the reflections all over the place and it does make quite a good pattern. I feel as if the background, I want a little bit more detail in the background itself. It's a little bit too dark. I can understand that it's difficult with the lightness of the spoons and the darkness of the background, but they too tend to be sort of hovering a little bit. I need a little bit of detail there to ground it down. I think it's been well arranged. The care has gone into actually the way that you're lining all of the spoons up. Just maybe the one right at the top is just slightly down, but aside from that, I think it's a good attempt. That one is going to be a 6 though.
Lavenham Church.
Yeah, Lavenham, I think they've got 8 bells there, got the shutters, and of course all the bells are stopped as well during COVID. But it's a nice leading line up to the church, and you've managed to keep all the verticals vertical and not getting too converging, and detail of all the church all the way through. And so often it's quite easy, I think, to just disregard these and not take pictures, because they're not necessarily going to be competition winners. But I think they're an important part of our record keeping of the country and everything that's going on. I like the way that you've got your path leading up to the front of the church, and the clouds in the sky, I think, also helped it as well. You got detail all the way through, so the light was good. Might have had a little bit of shadow on the right hand side of the tower, but you've got detail through that as well, and I think that works well. That one I gave like bated breath. Oh, come on. Is an 8, please.
Iceland.
Yeah, it's funny actually, because in a couple of weeks we've got Colin Westgate actually coming to give his talk on Iceland, because I know he spends quite a bit of time out there, and it's quite an unforgiving country. I remember going out there quite a few years ago, and it's never easy trying to find your way around with all the dark ash. I think it was just after the volcano was going off, so literally we just about made it in, and before everything went crazy. But yeah, it's a fascinating country to visit, and some of the landscapes are absolutely astounding. And I think you've captured a good sort of range of the hills and the mountains. I feel that with landscape, you could, I can understand why you've offered it in colour rather than black and white, because of these beautiful sort of purple flowers in the foreground really lead you into the picture. The hills in the distance are starting to get a little bit on the misty or hazy side, so a little bit of work needs to be done on that. And I think you've got a lovely sky in terms of the cloud, but again, in processing, you can do some work on that to bring more detail out in it. So I feel it's one of these shots that there's a lot of potential there, and I like the way that you've got the composition. I feel as if technically the processing, you could just bring out a lot more from it, really make it stand out. So that one's going to be a 6, please.
Thoroughbreds.
Yeah, and I love the way that these portraits of these horses have been handled. And I think individually, either one of the 2 portraits, I think would be worth a 10. But I find the difficulty when you've got 2 together is that they're actually bouncing off one another. And whether you've sort of done these 2 together as a commission, I think the owner or whoever commissioned it will be more than happy with it. I think they're superb portraits. But I think in the way that it's presented tonight with the 2 together, I feel as if my eyes just sort of going backwards and forwards between the 2. and I don't know where to rest. And that's the classic thing where you've got a pair of things, you're just looking between the two rather than having to look at one and enjoy it rather than the other one. I love the way that you've got the tones and the details in all of the horses, the way that the eyes are beautifully sharp, and I can feel sort of the texture of the mane and the muscle detail, I think is superbly cool. I think, again, the background, there's detail there in the background. You get a feeling that they're within a stable of some kind, and it just adds to it as well. So I'm going to go 9.5. If there'd been 1, you'd got a 10. But I think 2 in this case, 9.5.
Suffolk Walltown Cavendish.
Yeah, and this is sort of a typical beautiful summer's day that we all have the whole of the time in the UK, isn't it? We never get any rain at all. And it's typical sort of view of a beautiful sort of Suffolk village with the thatched cottages. So I think the author has done well with this one because there's a lot of detail in here. You've got the very white areas of particularly the white building on the right hand side, all the way through to the darkness of the trees on the left. I feel that the building on the right hand side, because it's bright, I tend to keep looking towards it. I feel that you could have probably just cropped that off. I don't think you would have lost anything from that. And also just the lines in the middle of the road, the bottom left-hand corner. Again, that's something that would quite easily have got rid of in whatever choice of photo processing software you use. They're just sort of 2 distractions at the moment. Again, you've got all the verticals and everything perfectly upright, and I like the sweep of the road in the way that it leads you around the picture. And you've got a really good sky behind there with the clouds and everything else. Again, landscapes is difficult because you want sort of that moodiness of the weather to some extent, and sometimes just sort of the bright skies and sunny days don't always give you that mood and that sort of feeling. So that one's going to be a 6.5, please.
The Hanover Band.
Yeah, and it's always really difficult when you're trying to take a picture, especially of a band or an orchestra like this, where you're trying to fit everybody in and tell a story. And you've given yourself a real difficult job because obviously the lighting conditions aren't always good. So I think you've done superbly well to get detail all the way through with no sort of hint of noise or anything else. And the lighting, even to the people right at the far end with the guy with the French horn, you can see detail and depth within there. And I think it's one of these things where you've got so many things going on, though. You've got the flags at the side, particularly the red and yellow flag on the left-hand side, that instantly sort of draws your eye across. But it's one of those things, you can't do anything about it. And then you've got either the balustrade or something on the bottom right-hand side. So I think you were on a hiding to nothing here because it's such a difficult shot to get. So I think what you've done with it, I think you've done a tremendous job of getting a picture that I'm sure everybody that's in the orchestra or the band at that time will be more than happy to have as a memory of the event. But in terms of a photographic competition, I'm not sure it exactly works. So that one's going to be a 6, please. I'd like to have heard the music though.
Farmhouse at Kew.
Yeah, I think this one has got a lot of potential, and I'm surprised really that you didn't actually think about putting it into monochrome because it is almost monochromatic as it is. I think the detail in there is absolutely terrific. I think they definitely need to employ a window cleaner, don't they? It could do with a bit of a brush up and clean. But I do love the sort of the texture and the detail all the way through. And I like the way that you've chosen to just select a part of it rather than the whole lot. And I think the leading from the left-hand side to the top actually works really well. Also, the fact that you haven't really got any colour or anything going on in the sky. I think if you actually converted this to a monochrome and made it a really sort of punchy, contrasty monochrome, I think it would really jump off the page. So it's one of these where I love the sort of the technical side, the fact that you've photographed it from that angle, the bits that you've chosen, the fact that everything is in focus where it needs to be. But I don't think it necessarily works in colour. So go back and have another work on this, because I think there's definitely a winning image there to get out of it. But as it is at the moment, I'm only going to give it a 7, I'm afraid.
Mark's Hall crocodile.
Yeah, and this is again, it's one of those sort of fun images, isn't it, that you come across it and somebody's actually seen this crocodile out of an old tree trunk or fallen tree and made a crocodile head out of it. But it's a good bit of artwork, isn't it? And that's one of the difficulties when you're a photographer and you spot these things. What are you actually adding to it as your own photographic image? Or are you just photographing somebody else's artwork? And I think that's very much what the case is of this one. If in terms of a record shot of something that was there at the time, I think you've done a good job. You've captured all of the detail of its location and what's going on with it, and the exposure and technique is really good. But in terms of creativity and composition and thinking of something different, I don't think you've quite nailed it this time, unfortunately. So that one is going to be a 5, please.
Excuse me, sorry, Sydney Opera House.
Yeah, the first thing that struck me about this one more than anything else was just the beautiful colours that you've got with the reflection of the lights actually in the water, and the mist sort of almost over the, starting to shroud the city itself. And the shapes, I think, are just absolutely beautiful. If you're on a boat, which I assume you were by the wake at the bottom, the fact that you managed to handhold it, and well, you couldn't do it on a tripod, it wouldn't have made much difference, but the fact that you managed to keep everything sharp and you've got detail all the way through, I think you've done technically absolutely amazing. One of the hardest things of doing nighttime photography is always you get one light if you've got a longer exposure, and it always gets very bright and it tends to burn out, and you've just got sort of one on the left hand side, which is always difficult to deal with. But there's no reason why you couldn't just sort of just tone it down a little bit, or just, you know, cover it over a little bit. I think the one thing that you could have possibly done again was just crop off the bottom where you've got the ripples in the water, just at the bottom sort of fraction. Then I think you could have got rid of that, because to me that's sort of a distraction rather than the ripples that are coming actually from sort of the Sydney, the Opera House with the lights in and everything else. So I think you could have lost that. I think that would have made it a stronger image. But as it is, that's going to be a 9, please.
Woodbridge Thistle.
Yeah, a bit of thought about how you're going to photograph it. Decided to sort of take it out of its surroundings and put it on a very sort of white background, almost a high key. I do like the way that you've created it and made it stand out, and very sort of subtle tones in terms of the greens and the purples, and almost made it into sort of like a very arty, almost a greeting card, I guess you could even sell it as, with the purple outline or key line around there that just constrains it in. Again, I think the key line in this case does work. It just does lift it in. I don't mind the thistle, the fact that the stem of it is actually just coming over the top of the key line. I think that adds to it as well. Again, a very competent bit of photography. Technically, you've got detail all the way through, and I think it's been well handled. That's going to be an 8.5.
Studio art.
Yeah, I think this is a case, again, with lockdown, you found something to photograph. And I think it works really well. I love the way that you've got the different colours of backgrounds, the sort of very purple base that actually links in with the vase, links in with the flowers, and then almost a contrasting yellow and greens as you move up through the frame. I think that works really well. And again, with the glass, I think you've handled it so well. I just got a lovely feeling of sort of, you can almost feel the texture of the vase. You've got detail in all of the flowers. The fact that you've got 3 there gives you something that leads your eye up the vase to the flowers at the top. and they really stand out against your choice of backgrounds. I think that works really well. That's going to be a 9.5, please.
We were here first.
Yeah, well done for actually spotting this. Anything where you've got birds in flight, particularly these that are incredibly fast, I think you've done well to capture. But in the same time, you've given yourself a really difficult task, because not only have you got your 2 birds in the background that are sat on the wire, but then you've got this other one whizzing across as well. So the chance of trying to get the depth of field and the shutter speed to capture both, I think you really gave yourself sort of an impossible task. But the birds that you've actually got there on the wire, they've got very dark heads, but you've managed to capture detail all the way through. And it's a moment of behaviour here, as this one is really sort of having a squawk at the one flying past. Unfortunately, the one flying past is very much sort of out of focus, or not out of focus, but blurry, because of the speed, the shutter speed as it was going past. And it is sort of half of the frame. So again, it's quite dominant in there. You want it to actually be in detail. But it would have been a tremendous shot if you'd managed it. I'm going to give that one an 8, please. Good attempt, though.
Raggedy Bantam.
Yeah, he is a raggedy bantam as well. And I think you've captured a bit of personality in here with all his feather detail and everything else. I like the way that he's sort of at an angle looking at you, and the different tones and colours in there are amazing, really, aren't they? You've got all sort of the oranges to the dark browns and the whites. So I think that's well done. The eyes absolutely crisp and sharp. Unfortunately, the background and sort of the surrounding areas that he's on isn't really sort of very conducive. You've got a lot of highlights in the background that, again, the vignette would have done quite well, just sort of to tone them down and get them out of the way. But a good depth of field, all the detail of the bird is there, and you've thrown as much as you can of the background out of focus. He's going to be 6.5, please.
They think it's all over. It is now.
Yeah, I think this is a really creative bit of photography. Let's find, there we are. Yeah, I think it's a really creative bit of photography, because again, it's all something that you've had to set up and think through. The fact that you got the black and white of the chess pieces, you've lit them in such a way that they've really got a feeling of sort of being 3D, not just being a flat object. And the fact that you've got this white sort of, the light is brightest on the queen itself. Is it the queen with the top with the cross? Can't remember, with the king. Long time since I played chess, but the fact that it's just there, and it really sort of focuses your attention actually on this one piece and the way that it's actually surrounded. A lot of thought has gone into the way that you've placed it on the board. Every single piece within the board is perfectly right in the center, and even the top of the white chess piece is just got the black of the opposition piece, just making it stand out. You can see it separate. I like the fact that it's right near the edge of the board. You just got that line across the bottom that again just holds it in as well. And the highlights on each of the pieces really make them sort of stand out. So that one's going to be a 10 as well, please.
Right. Thank you. So that's all of the marked. You did all the 9, 9.5, 10s as we went along, James, so no holdbacks.
Yep.
So what I'll try and do now is bring up everything that you scored as a 10.
Okay.
Which I'm assuming, have you already made your judge's pick?
I have.
You have.
I have. Do you want
and
me
I'm assuming it was
from
the.
that one?
I'm assuming it is from the 10s.
Yes.
Right, that's fine then. So I should just bring those up, she said, hopefully.
You need to do light bulb. Or, sorry, I went into.
Hang on, bear with me. I thought the light box showed all images, but okay, let's give it a try. Oh, clever clogs.
Oh, there's always one smarty pants.
Yeah. Now, we seem to have quite a lot of 10s.
Yeah, it was
Lovely.
lovely to have such a diverse range of images that all were worthwhile attend. So out of all of them, they all had their merits. But for me, personal choice.
Shall I page down or? Sorry about that noise, that was my dog.
Oh, shit. Give him a biscuit. It's going to be the Royal Academy, Here We Come, please.
Ah. So, judges choice. It's so long since I've done this. This is very embarrassing. I'm sorry, but there we go. Judges choice, and that was Brian.
Oh, fantastic!
Well done, Brian.
Well done,
Well
Brian.
done.
Well done, Brian.
Wonderful.
All right.
Okay.
Jane, thank you. If everybody's okay, if I try and do that again, bring the 10s up. I'm assuming everybody would like to know who the 10s were, yes?
Sounds
Yeah.
good.
I would. Making you work for your living tonight.
Yes, getting a bit nerve-wracking. Right, okay. I think,
Tell you.
well, I'm about to see, I'm hoping if I do that and then page forward, I'm hoping that I just bring the 10s up, but that was lines and that was John, if I remember rightly. Yeah, John Kay. You're absolutely right, it does. It's all right, I was prepared here with my bits of paper, but thank you, Roger, that's a jolly good idea. Yeah. So, okay.
Well done, John.
Well done to John. Jill, Chicago Summer.
Yeah, lovely. Well done, Jill.
Brilliant, Jill.
Andrew's fly tipping.
Yeah. Well done, Andrew.
Fantastic.
Tori's kingfisher with fish.
Wonderful.
That was very tongue twisting, trying to Royal Academy, Here We Come, we already know is Brian's. Dubrovnik is also Jill's.
Oh, well done.
Well done. Coffee Time is Lorraine's.
Yeah.
Well done.
Great picture, Lorraine.
Thank you.
Tori's Little Owl.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well done. And Rogers, they think it is, you read it. I think it's all over.
Well done, Roger.
Well done, Roger.
Roger.
Yeah,
And
really
that was
cracking
the-
images tonight.
well
Thank you to everybody.
Can we have the 9.5s as well?